On my master's graduation day, I walked into balloons, cake, candles, everything. The living room was transformed with decorations everywhere. But then I saw the banner. "Congratulations, Isabella, future doctor." It was my sister's medical school acceptance party. So I left quietly and did this. 2 weeks later, my sister would call in tears from the university ethics committee. I should have known better. But for one perfect, foolish moment, I let myself believe it. That the music, the streamers, the elaborate cake, it was all for me. That my family, who had dismissed my research presentations 3 years in a row, once because Isabella had test anxiety, had finally recognized what I'd accomplished. I saw the lights, the guests from our extended family, the carefully arranged decorations. People actually turned and clapped when I walked in, their faces lighting up with genuine celebration. My heart swelled with something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, unguarded joy. I almost laughed like something out of a movie. The kind of moment where everything clicks into place and you realize you belong somewhere. For a full 3 seconds, I lived in a fantasy world where I was the child who mattered, where my breakthrough in cardiac monitoring technology meant something to the people who raised me. And then I saw it clearly. "Congratulations, Isabella, future doctor." Huge gold letters across a glittery banner stretched between the mantel and the bookshelf. My sister's name in elegant cursive font, complete with a stethoscope graphic. Just like that, reality crashed down on me like ice water. Isabella swept into the room like she was accepting an award at a medical conference. Crisp white blazer, acceptance letter clutched in one hand, phone already positioned for the perfect selfie angle. The applause doubled, tripled when she arrived, drowning out any remaining illusion I might have had. "Oh my God, you guys," she squealed, her voice carrying that practiced excitement she'd perfected over the years. I'm literally going to cry. "This is everything I've ever dreamed of." She didn't cry, of course. She never cries unless there's an audience large enough or a financial benefit involved. I stood off to the side, still clutching the small wrapped gift I'd brought for myself. The one I'd hoped my parents might remember to give me. It was pathetic, really, but I was used to being pathetic where my family was concerned. I wasn't used to this level of deliberate cruelty, though. I found Catherine in the kitchen, arranging medical-themed cupcakes on a silver platter, and asked very calmly if they had intentionally scheduled Isabella's celebration. On the day my research paper was published in the Journal of Biomedical Engineering. She looked confused first, as if she'd genuinely forgotten, then guilty when the realization hit her, then annoyed that I'd brought it up. "Well," she said, not meeting my eyes, "we thought we'd celebrate both achievements. You don't like a lot of attention anyway, right? You've always been more comfortable in the background." Then Richard chimed in from his position on the couch, beer in hand. Like he was offering helpful perspective. "We ordered that chocolate cake you used to like as a kid. See, we didn't completely forget about you." A cake decorated with Isabella's photo in a white coat, a tiny fondant stethoscope, and "Congratulations, Dr. Isabella," written in gold frosting, really screamed, "Happy Publication Day, Marcus." It was almost insulting how little effort they'd put into even pretending this was about me, too. Isabella finally looked over and noticed me standing there. "Oh, hey, Marcus," she said, air kissing my cheek with the detached warmth of a politician greeting constituents. "You didn't tell me you were coming to my party." My party, not our party. Mine had never been a consideration. "That's totally fine, though. We can share the celebration, unless that makes you feel weird about it or something." She said it like I was a neighbor who'd wandered in uninvited, like my presence was a minor inconvenience she was graciously willing to tolerate. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Hope you don't mind, by the way. We kinda used your research grant money for the catering. Catherine said it would be easier than figuring out payment. And technically, this is celebrating academic success, so it's educational, right?" That's when my carefully maintained composure cracked like ice under pressure. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and opened my banking app, praying I'd misunderstood what she'd just said so casually. And there it was, stark and undeniable. A $1,200 catering charge from yesterday. A $800 venue deposit for the community center from 4 days ago. A $500 floral arrangement order with the note, "For our future doctor's big day." Multiple charges totaling $2,500 in research funding that was supposed to go toward clinical trials for my cardiac monitoring device. I felt heat crawl up my neck, not the burning heat of rage yet, but something colder and more devastating. Shame. The kind of shame that sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The realization that I'd been reduced to nothing more than a funding source for my sister's endless celebrations. I didn't say anything, didn't make a scene, didn't demand explanations or apologies. I just turned around and walked toward the door, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I think someone called after me, asking where I was going. Isabella might have said, "You're seriously leaving right now? Are you going to make this dramatic and ruin my day?" I didn't answer because I wasn't being dramatic. I was done. Finished. They thought I'd go home, sulk for a few days, and then show up next week pretending nothing had happened, ready to write another check. What I actually did was drive straight to the university and file a formal complaint with the Research Ethics Committee. And 2 weeks later, Isabella would be calling me sobbing from their conference room. The first time I realized my sister Isabella could manipulate her way out of anything. She was 6 and I was 8. She'd taken a $20 bill from Catherine's purse to buy candy at school. When I found the empty candy wrappers hidden in her backpack and told our parents, Isabella burst into tears, pointed directly at me with a trembling finger and declared through her sobs, "Marcus told me to take it. He said Mommy wouldn't mind." I was grounded for 2 weeks and had to write an apology letter. Isabella got taken out for ice cream because she was clearly traumatized by my bad influence. That was the beginning, or at least the first time I remember understanding that the rules in our house weren't applied equally. Back then, I convinced myself it would balance out eventually, that when we got older, people would see through her performance and recognize her manipulations for what they were. They didn't, because Isabella didn't outgrow that phase. She refined it, perfected it, turned it into an art form that could fool teachers, friends, and eventually admissions committees. And my parents, Catherine and Richard, they applauded every step of the way like proud theatre patrons watching their star performer. Growing up, Isabella always had an audience for her carefully crafted persona. Her entire identity was a stage production perfect smile practiced in mirrors, perfect hair styled for maximum impact, perfect tearful apologies delivered with just the right amount of vulnerability, all followed by absolutely zero consequences for her actions. If I brought home a B on a chemistry test, my parents would frown and say, "Marcus, you're smart enough to get perfect scores. Why aren't you applying yourself? Your future career depends on these grades." If Isabella scraped by with a C- in the same subject, suddenly it was, "She's doing her absolute best under tremendous pressure." Medical school prerequisites are so demanding, and she's already dealing with so much stress. The double standard was breathtaking in its consistency. She once borrowed my laptop for what she claimed was a critical assignment, and returned it 3 days later with a cracked screen, 5 missing keys, and mysterious sticky residue coating the keyboard. When I told her she needed to pay for the repair, she rolled her eyes and sighed like I was asking her to donate a kidney. "Marcus, I'm literally a pre-med student," she said, as if that explained everything. "You have a job and make actual money. Don't be selfish about material things when I'm trying to become a doctor and help people." She said it like I was being unreasonable for not wanting to bankroll her careless destruction of my property. But that was Isabella's way. She didn't ask for things. She simply took them. And somehow my parents always framed her taking as an expression of family love and my resistance as selfish individualism. When Isabella announced she wanted to spend a summer doing medical research in Costa Rica, my parents immediately raided their emergency savings, took out a small loan, and proudly funded her $8,000 educational opportunity. When I needed help covering a $1,200 car repair so I could get to my internship after my transmission died, I was told to learn better budgeting skills and handle my own responsibilities like an adult. I paid for my entire undergraduate degree myself, every single credit hour, working 2 jobs and surviving on generic ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for months at a time. Isabella, meanwhile, got a fully funded education, 0 student loans, and a monthly allowance so generous she could afford regular spa days and weekend trips with friends, all so she could focus on her studies without financial stress. She said she desperately needed $3,200 for MCAT prep courses and application fees, that she'd miscalculated her expenses and was facing deadlines she couldn't miss. "Please don't tell Catherine and Richard," she whispered into the phone. "I'm so ashamed that I messed this up. I'm scared I've ruined everything, but I can't disappoint them. This could be my only shot at becoming the doctor Dad always wanted in the family." I wired the money within 30 minutes. Staying up late to make sure the transfer went through immediately. 2 weeks later, she posted a series of photos from a luxury wellness retreat in Sedona. Yoga sessions overlooking red rock formations, crystal healing therapy, meditation workshops, and a $400 per night resort suite with a private hot tub. The caption read, "Sometimes you need to invest in your mental health to prepare for the challenges ahead." When I confronted her about using medical school money for vacation expenses, she blinked at me with that practiced innocent expression and said, "Marcus, I was having an emotional breakdown from academic pressure. You don't understand how mentally draining pre-med requirements are. That retreat was a medical necessity for my psychological well-being." My parents' response when I mentioned it, "Let it go, Marcus. Isabella has always been more sensitive than you. She processes stress differently, and you need to be more supportive of her unique needs." I didn't report her to anyone. I didn't even raise my voice. I just started quietly, methodically protecting myself, changing passwords, removing my payment information from shared accounts, closing joint access to anything she hadn't legitimately earned. I thought I'd covered all the bases, secured all the vulnerabilities. But apparently Isabella had been planning something much more ambitious anyway, something that would make her previous schemes look like practice runs. I found out later that Catherine had been using my old research account card, the one linked to my biomedical engineering grant that I'd forgotten to deactivate, because it was still connected to laboratory supply orders from last semester's project. Apparently, using my research funding for Isabella's medical school celebration wasn't theft in their minds. It was just convenient family resource allocation. I should have predicted this escalation, but it still hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. After I left the party, I sat in my car in the university parking lot for over an hour, not crying, just staring through the windshield, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. It wasn't even primarily about the money, though losing $2,500 in research funding was devastating for my project timeline. It was the crushing realization that no matter how old we got, no matter what I accomplished professionally, nothing fundamental had changed in my family's perception of me. I was still the backup plan, the afterthought, the walking wallet who existed to make Isabella's dreams more affordable. You know what Catherine texted me that night while I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at my research proposal and wondering how I'd explain the missing funds to my advisor? "You embarrassed Isabella by walking out of her celebration. You made everything about yourself again instead of supporting your sister's achievement. This kind of selfish behavior is exactly why you have trouble maintaining relationships." I didn't respond to her message. Instead, I opened Instagram and scrolled through Isabella's celebration posts with a kind of morbid fascination. There she was, laughing beside the elaborate cake my research money had purchased, holding up a custom sign that read, "Class of 2029 MD, she did it." Dozens of family friends had commented with congratulations and heart emojis. The next day, she posted a photo of her acceptance gifts arranged artfully on her bed and wrote, "Feeling so grateful for my incredible family who always believes in my dreams and supports my journey." Guess who wasn't mentioned in the caption or tagged in any of the photos? Guess whose contribution to her journey went completely unacknowledged? While she basked in praise for achievements funded by my stolen research money, that's when my emotional response shifted from hurt and disappointment to something much sharper and more focused. I wasn't just wounded anymore. I was quietly furious, the kind of anger that doesn't burn hot and destructive but settles in your chest like ice and sharpens your thinking. I wasn't going to scream at them. I wasn't going to post passive-aggressive social media responses. I was going to do something they never expected from compliant, reliable Marcus Tell, someone with actual authority who could take meaningful action. I spent the next 3 days methodically gathering evidence like I was preparing for a court case. My bank statements showed every fraudulent charge: the catering, the venue rental, the flowers, even a $200 charge for custom photo booth props. The vendor confirmation emails had Isabella's name and contact information listed as the primary organizer. The invoices were sent directly to her email address. The rental agreement was signed Isabella, celebrating medical school acceptance, but the payment method was my research grant card. I even had text message screenshots from months ago where Isabella had asked me, "You're not going to make a big deal about your publication date, right?" It's right around my acceptance celebration, and honestly, I kind of need this moment to be all about me, LOL. At the time, I'd ignored her message, chalked it up to typical Isabella self-centeredness. But now those screenshots were gold standard evidence, proof that this wasn't a misunderstanding or oversight. This was premeditated, calculated theft of my research funding for her personal celebration. I didn't tell anyone in my family that I was filing a formal complaint. Not Catherine, not Richard, certainly not Isabella. I just walked into the university's Research Integrity Office with a manila folder full of evidence, and the quiet determination of someone who had finally reached their breaking point. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Ethics Committee chair, looked genuinely uncomfortable when I explained who was involved in the misuse of grant funds. She kept glancing at my documentation, then back at my face like she was hoping I'd suddenly announce this was all a misunderstanding. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I need you to understand that filing this complaint will trigger a formal investigation. Your sister's medical school acceptance could be reviewed if they determine academic dishonesty was involved." I told her I understood completely. I wasn't looking to destroy Isabella's future out of spite. I just wanted to protect my research and establish boundaries that had consequences when crossed. I signed every form they put in front of me. I answered every detailed question about the timeline and the financial transactions. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in years. 2 days later, Isabella sent me a text that perfectly captured her self-centered worldview. "Hey Marcus, can you Venmo me $50 for the Uber rides from my party? Since it was technically your day too, we should split the transportation costs, right?" I didn't answer. I just saved the screenshot as additional evidence of her mindset. 2 weeks later, she would be sitting in the University Ethics Committee conference room, sobbing into her phone, and for the first time in our relationship, I wouldn't be the person she could count on to fix her problems or absorb the consequences of her choices. She called me at 613 in the morning on a Tuesday, not texting or leaving a voicemail like a normal person, but calling with that urgent old-school ringtone that cuts through sleep like an alarm. I let it go to voicemail, hoping she'd get the message that I wasn't available for crisis management anymore. She called again, immediately, then again, then a fourth time with the persistence of someone who'd never learned that no was a complete sentence. The fourth call I answered, not because I wanted to help, but because I thought maybe someone had been in an accident or died. Honestly, that would have been easier to deal with than another Isabella drama. "Marcus," she gasped, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine panic. "Oh my God, I'm at the university in some conference room. They said there's a formal complaint, a research misconduct complaint with your name on it. Why would you do this to me? What have you done to my future?" I sat up in bed, turned on the bedside lamp, and blinked into the phone like it could somehow give me the strength to handle this conversation with the composure she'd never shown me. "Oh," I said calmly, "so that's the part you're shocked about. Not the part where you stole my research funding." Long silence on the other end. "I didn't steal anything," she said instantly, voice shifting into defensive mode like a switch had been flipped. "That was family money being used for a family celebration. Catherine said it was fine. You're seriously going to destroy your own sister's medical career over one party?" There it was, Isabella's classic defense strategy laid bare: cry first to establish victimhood, then play the family loyalty card to guilt me into backing down. And if those tactics fail, escalate to martyrdom and threats about ruined futures. It was like watching a master manipulator run through her greatest hits playbook. "Are you being questioned by the committee?" I asked, keeping my voice steady and factual. "Yes," she whispered. "They said they need me to verify how I obtained access to your research account, and that the funding wasn't authorized for personal use. And now they're saying I might face disciplinary action that could affect my medical school enrollment." "Marcus, you're destroying my entire life over a birthday party." "No, Isabella," I said quietly. "You're destroying your own life because you've spent years treating me like a personal ATM with no consequences." Later that day, I found out the full details of what had happened in that conference room. Detective Sarah Chen, who was brought in to handle the financial aspects of the investigation, had asked Isabella directly how she obtained my research account information. Isabella had apparently told them, with complete sincerity, I took photos of his cards when he left his wallet on the kitchen counter during Thanksgiving. I thought he wouldn't mind since this was celebrating academic achievement, and he's always supported my education. When Detective Chen asked if I had given explicit permission for her to use research funds for personal expenses, Isabella just blinked and said, "Well, he didn't specifically say I couldn't." That was the level of logical reasoning and ethical awareness we were dealing with. By that afternoon, my phone was exploding with notifications like a social media emergency. Texts from Catherine, voicemails from Richard, even messages from my Aunt Susan, who I hadn't spoken to in 4 years and who somehow had gotten dragged into Isabella's crisis management campaign. Catherine's message: "You went way too far this time, Marcus. Isabella is completely devastated and can't stop crying. How could you be so cruel?" Richard's voicemail: "Son, you really want to send your own sister to face disciplinary action over a family misunderstanding? This isn't who we raised you to be." Aunt Susan's text was the most presumptuous. "Whatever happened to handling family problems like adults? Not everything needs to involve authorities and investigations. Some things should stay private and be worked out with love and forgiveness." The irony was breathtaking. None of them had suggested handling things like adults when Isabella was stealing from me. None of them had recommended love and forgiveness. When I was the one being taken advantage of year after year, I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I didn't care about family relationships, but because I'd finally learned to care about myself more than I cared about keeping everyone else comfortable with dysfunction. That evening, Isabella showed up at my apartment building. I still don't know how she got my address or convinced someone to buzz her into the building. Probably the same manipulation tactics she'd been using her entire life: tears, helplessness, claims of family emergency. Whatever worked on whoever was available. I opened my door just wide enough to see her face red and puffy from crying, but not in a genuinely remorseful way. More like the strategic tears of someone who'd been crying because it was her best remaining strategy. Not because she'd gained any real insight into her behavior. "I'm not here to fight with you," she said, voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable and non-threatening. "I just really need you to consider dropping this complaint, please. The committee said this could go on my permanent academic record. It could affect medical school, residency applications, even my medical license eventually." I looked at her, really studied her face and body language, and what I saw wasn't a scared sister who'd learned from her mistakes. What I saw was a young woman who had never been held accountable for anything, and still didn't understand why this situation was different from all the others she'd talked her way out of. "Isabella," I said quietly, "you lied about needing money for medical school applications and used it for vacation. You stole my research funding for your personal celebration. You threw yourself a party on the day my work was published and acted like I was an inconvenience for existing. And now you want me to protect you from the consequences of your own choices." "I didn't know it would escalate like this," she whispered, as if ignorance was a legitimate defense for theft. "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "It never escalates for you because people like me always absorb the consequences and clean up your messes." Right on cue, the tears started again, round 2 of the performance. Maybe round 3. I'd stopped keeping track, but they flowed anyway like she'd turned on a faucet. "You're doing this to punish me," she said, voice trembling with what she probably thought was righteous indignation. "You've always been jealous of the attention I get. You've always resented that I'm going to be a doctor while you just work with machines." That accusation actually made me laugh out loud, genuinely and without humor. "Jealous of you, Isabella?" "Yeah, you're absolutely right," I said. "I've always dreamed of being the sibling who manipulates her way through life, steals from family members, and destroys other people's research projects. That's definitely been my life goal." Her expression shifted from teary vulnerability to cold anger in about 2 seconds, like someone had flipped a switch in her brain. The crying stopped abruptly. "You think you're so perfect," she snapped, all pretense of remorse disappearing. "But you're just bitter and pathetic. You think being technically right makes you better than everyone else. You think your little engineering projects are more important than real medicine that saves lives." "No," I said calmly. "But I do think my research funding shouldn't be stolen to pay for your celebration parties." I closed the door while she was mid-rant, didn't slam it or raise my voice, just quietly ended the conversation because I was finally done being the captive audience for Isabella's one-woman victim performance. Over the next week, things escalated beyond anything I'd anticipated. Catherine and Richard started calling me daily, not to apologize for their daughter's behavior, not to ask how I was handling the situation, but to demand that I fix the problem I'd supposedly created. Apparently, Isabella's acceptance to her top-choice medical school was being reviewed due to the ethics investigation. Her plan to start classes in the fall was suddenly uncertain. And instead of facing that reality with maturity, Isabella had gone into complete emotional meltdown mode. "Are you satisfied now?" Catherine screamed at me over the phone during one particularly heated conversation. She's talking about taking a gap year because she's so traumatized by this whole ordeal. Her entire future as a doctor could be derailed. "Is that what you wanted, Marcus? To destroy your sister's dreams of helping people?" "I was never trying to destroy her future," I replied as calmly as I could manage. "I was trying to protect my own research and establish basic boundaries. If her dreams can't survive the consequences of her own actions, maybe they weren't as solid as everyone pretended." They didn't hear me. They never really heard anything I said when it conflicted with their image of Isabella as the family's golden child, whose success justified any sacrifice from everyone else. A few days later, Richard left me a voicemail. His tone was different this time, calm, quiet, almost paternal, like he was speaking to a confused child who needed gentle guidance back to the correct path. "Son, I know you felt underappreciated, and honestly, I can understand that feeling. I really can. But this isn't the right way to handle family problems. This is family, Marcus. And family means sometimes we do things we don't like, make sacrifices we don't want to make, forgive things that hurt us. That's just how family works. That's what holds us together." I played that message 3 times. Once to hear what he was actually saying, once to hear what he was avoiding saying, and once to fully absorb the implications. He never once acknowledged that Isabella had done anything wrong. Never once apologized for years of treating me like a second-class family member. Never once recognized that family should mean mutual respect and consideration, not just endless tolerance for one person's destructive behavior. His message was just a gentle, loving suggestion that I continue to be quiet while they continued to take advantage of me, wrapped in warm language about family unity and sacrifice. And for the first time in my life, I understood something with perfect clarity. Keeping the peace in my family was just a euphemism for keep being silent while Isabella does whatever she wants. Family harmony meant my feelings and needs didn't matter as long as Isabella was happy. That's just how family works, meant the system would never change because changing it would require them to admit they'd been wrong for decades. A week after that voicemail, I received a text from Isabella. No emojis, no casual abbreviations, no passive-aggressive lol additions. Just one simple cold line. "You win, Marcus. I hope you're proud of yourself for destroying your sister's life." And the truth was, I wasn't proud. I wasn't gloating or celebrating or feeling any satisfaction about her situation. I was just exhausted and done. Done carrying guilt that belonged to other people. Done paying financially and emotionally for mistakes I hadn't made. Done playing the role of the silent, dependable brother while they applauded Isabella for basic existence. They had systematically pushed me out of every celebration, every moment of recognition, every space where I should have mattered as much as she did. And now they were shocked and outraged that I'd finally stepped up to defend myself and my work. By the time Isabella sent me that final accusatory text, I thought we'd reached the end of the drama. I thought the worst was over, that maybe they'd finally leave me alone to focus on my research and rebuild my funding timeline. I was completely wrong. Apparently, the most dangerous version of Isabella wasn't Isabella crying or Isabella manipulating. It was Isabella cornered with nothing left to lose. Because a desperate Isabella came with backup plans and extended family reinforcements I'd never anticipated. 3 days after that text, Catherine showed up at my workplace like she was conducting a military operation. She didn't call ahead, didn't ask if I was available, just marched into the Biomedical Engineering Department lobby like she had every right to interrupt my professional day with family drama. When the receptionist called to let me know I had a visitor, I knew immediately who it was and what this meant. When I came down to meet her, she looked me up, and down with the kind of cold assessment usually reserved for disappointing employees about to be fired. "I raised you better than this, Marcus," she said before I could even say hello. No greeting, no acknowledgement that she was disrupting my workday, just straight into guilt-based accusations designed to put me on the defensive. I motioned toward the door, suggesting we step outside to avoid making my colleagues uncomfortable with personal drama. She followed, her heels clicking against the pavement with sharp, angry precision like every step was a judgment against my character. "You've completely humiliated Isabella," she said, voice tight with the kind of controlled fury I remembered from childhood when I'd disappointed her. "Do you understand what this means for her future? She might not get into medical school now. Her entire career as a doctor could be ruined before it even starts. Catherine, I said, keeping my voice level and professional. That's usually what happens when someone commits research fund misappropriation. Actions have consequences. Her face flushed red, but not from shame or embarrassment about her daughter's behavior. From pure anger that I wasn't immediately caving to pressure like I always had before. You're doing this out of spite over one party, she snapped. We raised you, Marcus. We fed you, clothed you, paid for your school supplies and sports equipment when you were growing up. Right, I replied. And in return, over the past 5 years, I've contributed $15,000 toward the down payment on your house, covered your utility bills for 2 years during Richard's unemployment, and paid for Isabella's car insurance for 3 years running. But sure, let's talk about that time in 3rd grade when you bought me soccer cleats. She actually had the audacity to say those were your choices, Marcus. We never asked you to help financially. No, they never asked directly. They just created situations where helping was the only option if I wanted to remain part of the family. Then acted like my contributions were voluntary gestures rather than emotional extortion. They expected me to pick up the slack when Isabella overspent her allowance on designer clothes. They expected me to cover the gap when Richard forgot important bills. They expected me to be grateful for occasional acknowledgement while Isabella was handed everything she wanted, including my research funding for her personal celebrations. I'm not dropping the complaint, I said firmly, and if Isabella has any sense left, she'll accept whatever resolution the Ethics Committee offers and learn from this experience. Catherine glared at me with the kind of hatred usually reserved for strangers who've wronged you deliberately. You're not just punishing Isabella, she said. You're punishing this entire family. You're destroying our reputation in the community. I actually shrugged at that point because I'd finally reached a place where their community reputation mattered less to me than my own self-respect. Maybe this family should have thought about reputation before treating me like a stranger with a checkbook for the past decade. And I walked back inside, leaving her standing there in her designer shoes. Arms folded, probably the same outfit she'd worn to Isabella's party that I'd unknowingly funded. The next escalation came 2 days later and showed just how far Isabella was willing to go when her usual tactics failed. She posted a long, carefully crafted social media statement about family betrayal, sibling rivalry, and how some people will destroy the ones they're supposed to love just to feel important. She didn't mention my name directly, but she tagged every single member of our extended family, every cousin, every aunt and uncle, even our 80-year-old grandmother who barely understands Facebook. The post was a masterpiece of manipulation, painting herself as the innocent victim of unspecified family cruelty, while hinting at just enough detail to make people curious and sympathetic. Within hours, the comments section was flooded with supportive messages. Who would do something so terrible to you? You're such a strong person, Isabella. Rise above this negativity. Family is supposed to protect and support each other, not tear each other down. I didn't respond to the post, but I did screenshot every single comment for my records. The next morning, I woke up to 7 missed calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to since childhood family reunions, and 1 direct message from our cousin David, who actually knew the full story and simply wrote, "They're drowning, Marcus. Don't throw them a life raft. You've been their life raft for too long already." But Isabella wasn't finished with her campaign to pressure me into backing down. Her next move crossed a line I never would have imagined she'd cross. She contacted Dr. Jennifer Walsh directly, pretending to be a concerned family friend, and suggested that I was having some kind of mental health crisis that was causing me to lash out inappropriately at loved ones. The email, which Dr. Walsh forwarded to me immediately, claimed that I'd been acting erratically, making false accusations against family members, and might be experiencing psychological issues related to work stress. It suggested that the committee might want to consider whether my complaint was reliable given my apparent mental state. Fortunately, Dr. Walsh is exactly the kind of person you want handling ethical investigations, direct, no nonsense. Someone who runs ultramarathons for fun and doesn't tolerate manipulation attempts. She forwarded Isabella's email to me with a single line. Let me know if I need to document this as attempted interference with an ongoing investigation. I replied immediately, please document everything. Isabella is spiraling, and she'll apparently try to destroy anyone who won't enable her behavior. We actually laughed about it during a brief phone call, but underneath my amusement, I was genuinely shaken. Isabella wasn't just panicking anymore. She was actively trying to sabotage my professional reputation and my credibility with university officials. She'd moved from manipulation to character assassination, and she was apparently willing to drag down anyone who wouldn't help keep her afloat. The University Ethics Committee moved faster than I'd expected, probably because the evidence was so clear and well documented. Maybe because Isabella's attempt to interfere with the investigation had backfired so spectacularly. Maybe because Dr. Walsh and Detective Chen were the kind of professionals who didn't appreciate being lied to or manipulated. They offered Isabella a resolution agreement pay back the full $20,500 in misused research funds, complete 120 hours of community service at a non-profit organization, attend mandatory workshops on research ethics and financial responsibility, and write a formal apology acknowledging her actions. In return, the complaint would be resolved without formal disciplinary action on her permanent record, and her medical school enrollment wouldn't be affected. All she had to do was admit she'd made a mistake, take responsibility for her choices, learn something from the experience, and make things right. Simple, reasonable, and designed to be educational rather than purely punitive. She refused. According to Dr. Walsh, Isabella claimed the terms were humiliating and degrading, and that accepting them would make her look guilty of serious wrongdoing when this was just a family misunderstanding. Detective Chen's response, as reported to me later: "You are guilty of wrongdoing. That's why we're offering you a chance to resolve this constructively instead of facing formal charges." Eventually, Isabella's stubborn pride cracked, but not because she developed any self-awareness or genuine remorse. Her medical school found out about the ongoing ethics investigation and put her enrollment on hold pending resolution. The future she'd been so proud of, the career she'd stolen my research funding to celebrate, was suddenly uncertain. No guaranteed admission, no full semester start date, no clear path to becoming the family doctor everyone expected her to be. Just Isabella sitting in her childhood bedroom in Catherine and Richard's house, alternating between fury and panic, making phone calls to lawyers she couldn't afford and crying to anyone who would listen about how unfair her life had become. And for the first time in family crisis history, guess who didn't bail her out financially or emotionally? Catherine and Richard. They were apparently too busy dealing with their own embarrassment about having raised a daughter who couldn't handle basic ethical behavior. My parents made one last attempt to reel me back into the family dysfunction pattern. During a conference call that felt like a corporate damage control meeting, Catherine's voice was artificially sweet and calculated like a customer service representative trying to handle a difficult client. "We just want to have a conversation, Marcus. We want to work this out as a family." Isabella was on the call too, silent for the first few minutes, then finally speaking in the flattest, most insincere tone I'd ever heard from her. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to hurt you or cause problems." It sounded like a hostage reading a prepared statement, like a child being forced to apologize after hitting another kid on the playground. "What exactly are you sorry for, Isabella?" I asked, genuinely curious whether she'd learned anything from this experience. Long pause. "For using your card without asking permission first." "That's not what happened," I said calmly. "You stole research funding that was designated for medical device development." The silence on the other end was so thick I could practically feel their discomfort through the phone. "You've made your point." "Marcus," Richard said finally, his voice cold and dismissive. "So what happens now? Are you going to cut us off completely? Are you planning to disown your family over this? Is that what you want?" "No, Richard," I replied. "I'm just done pretending that any of this behavior is normal or acceptable." And then I hung up. No dramatic speeches, no emotional outbursts. Just quiet, final clarity about what I would and wouldn't tolerate going forward. 3 months later, Isabella had grudgingly completed the ethics workshops and was working part-time at a veterinary clinic while reapplying to medical schools for the following year. Catherine and Richard still hadn't contacted me directly, but I'd moved to a different city, gotten a promotion to lead researcher on a cardiac monitoring project, and found a spacious apartment where I could work on my research without interruption. I had a small group of friends now who knew me as Marcus the biomedical engineer, not Isabella's older brother or the family's designated problem solver. People who appreciated my work, understood my goals, and treated me like my thoughts and feelings mattered. One quiet evening in November, I received a text message from Isabella, saw on LinkedIn that you moved and got promoted. "Hope things are going well for you." I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, and I could really use someone to talk to who understands the family dynamics. I stared at that message for a long time, sitting on my new balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the city lights flicker like small, distant stars. Then I turned off my phone, opened my laptop, and spent the evening working on research that might actually save lives someday. For the first time in years, my life wasn't about managing Isabella's crises or absorbing the emotional fallout from her poor decisions. And in that silence, surrounded by my own work and my own choices, I finally felt something I'd almost forgotten existed: peace. Complete, uncomplicated peace. I still have complicated feelings about the whole situation sometimes. Not guilt exactly, but that persistent little voice that asks, what if you'd just let it go one more time? What if you'd found a way to fix this without consequences? But then I remember the years of being invisible, the stolen money, the research funding used for parties that celebrated everyone except me, and I know with absolute certainty that I made the right choice. Sometimes protecting yourself means disappointing people who never really cared about protecting you.